You know what investing is, but how does an investment differ from an asset?
You are listening to Wealth Talks, and today you're going to get to hear about the difference between an investment and an asset. What is the difference there? You're also going to get to hear a question that came in from someone listening to this podcast. You'll get to hear the reasoning behind it, why we're giving the answer we do. And you're also going to get to hear about how to manage risk, or is it even possible to manage risk? Most people, when they try to manage risk, just end up hiding it instead.
Risk, that's a big word. And an investment, as you know, is defined as 100% risk of losing everything that you have put into that investment. That's the potential. And, you know, some people rate things as high risk and low risk, and that's based on historical performance. But does anybody really know the future, John?
No. We can't know the future entirely.
And we're going to talk about that with you. Nassim Taleb has written an excellent book called The Black Swan, and he understands risk very, very well. So let's start off, though, talking about a Supreme Court case back in 1911, Grigsby versus Russell. And Oliver Wendell Holmes, the Justice of the Supreme Court, said this, that a life insurance policy possesses all the ordinary characteristics of property and therefore represents an asset that can be transferred without limitation. And then this is kind of confusing. He goes on to say that life insurance has become in our days one of the best recognized forms of investment and self-compelled savings. So he uses the term investment in defining an asset.
Mm-hmm. And which is interesting because a lot of people at this point in time, 1911 in the United States, he says it's one of the best recognized forms of investment and savings.
And that's because of the controlled risk in a life insurance policy. The type of insurance that was sold back then was not IUL products where the risk was placed back onto the policy owner. It was the risk that was assumed by the insurance company. Mm-hmm. That's the type of products that Life Benefits here we always advocate is participating whole life insurance. So that risk, Oliver Wendell Holmes, was taken up by the insurance company, and a guarantee was provided to the owner of a life insurance policy, and that turned it into an asset. Now, the definition of an asset, for those that you don't know, is something that you own that produces income greater than what it takes for you to maintain it.
So an asset can be an investment if the investment is performing that way.
That's correct. So a piece of rental property that you don't own completely, mm-hmm. that is generating more cash value than what your expenses, taxes, and maintenance and all those upkeeps are, could be considered an asset. But a much stronger asset would be something that you own completely that is creating a passive income for you and you hold no risk with it. And that is life insurance, participating whole life insurance.
And it's interesting. This kind of leads into the one of the next topics for discussion when we're talking about risk, because the risk in life insurance is different type of risk than the risk that you find in many types of investments. For example, the stock market. The risk there is it has an emotional component, whereas the risk in life insurance policy, it is based on statistical data, how long people are going to live. There is a solid foundation to the way that risk is managed.
And you know, you've heard the saying that statistics don't lie, but statisticians do. So we have to be careful with that because there's all kinds of life insurance products now where there is data, statistics that don't add up logically. So it's very difficult for someone in the general public to realize that. And so we always have to look at the guarantees in a policy, because the guarantees are the only thing that's guaranteed. That's the only contract you really have, is that there's going to be a guaranteed death benefit and a guaranteed cash value. And anything above that is a speculative risk that you're assuming if you're thinking that you're going to see that kind of performance in a policy. John, we have a video that is cut to show people how to read a life insurance policy. Can we attach that video link to this podcast somehow?
Yes, the video on how to read a life insurance illustration?
Yes.
I'll make a note to do that.
That is so important that the public become aware of how to read these products, because you can be easily misled into thinking that you are buying an asset when you're actually just assuming a huge risk that the insurance company wanted to dish off on you.
And that's something that we can help you with too. If you have a policy that you're not certain what you're looking at there, give our office a call, send it in for a free policy review. You can call us at 702-660-7000 to request that. We'll be happy to help you with that. A question comes in from a recent listener on the podcast. He says, I'm repaying policy loans monthly, but then I'm borrowing it out, the money right back out to pay off debts that I have, that I'm working on paying off my debt. So he was a little bit concerned about that. He says, is this something that I need to change in some way?
This reminds me of what we were taught when we first opened our first whole life policy. We were told just to run it through your bank. Run it through your policy over and over again, because that's what creates money. And at first, if you don't understand what's happening in a policy, it actually appears that that's happening, because each time you repay a loan before the end of the anniversary of the policy, the insurance company is going to reimburse interest that they withheld for the whole policy anniversary. And it looks like, oh my goodness, there's money coming back in here. But that really isn't money coming back. It's money that you never used. Mm-hmm. It's the interest that you never used on the loan because you repaid it. So if you're trying to pay off debt, and you've got debt that's like unsecured debt, like credit card debt, personal lines of credit, things like that, and you're paying high interest on that, it makes a whole lot more sense just to pay the interest to the insurance company for the policy loan and keep using their money until you get that high interest taken care of, mm-hmm. and you kill those unsecured debts. Then pay the policy loan back, because you'll save money by paying the minimal interest rate on a policy loan, because you can use the capital to reduce unsecured debt that has a much higher interest rate that would be going to somebody else.
Yes. And here's the key. We have done hundreds of blueprints for people that have debt and people that don't have debt. If they already have their debt paid off, they're looking for other investments. We've done hundreds of blueprints looking at what's the most efficient point. How long do you borrow from a policy before you start paying it back if you have these other outside debts? There is a balance here. And that balance usually comes down to the foundation of the 10-20-70 rule that you sometimes hear us talk about, where 10% of your income goes to savings, yours to keep, 20% the maximum to creditors, 70% to lifestyle expenses. The 10% that's yours to keep, that going to the insurance premium, we usually find that provides a very good balance with the size of policy that you need while you're paying off debt. Once you've paid off the debt, then you can look at paying those policy loans back. But you don't want to get too much policy loans while you're in the process of paying off that debt.
And just to clarify, that 10-20-70 rule, that 20% debt is unsecured debt. It's not like debt for your automobile. It's not like debt for your home. It's probably not even debt like for your student loans, because those are things that your home and your car are secured because you're actually purchasing an asset. And your student loan, without that, you probably wouldn't be earning the income you're earning. So we put those over into the living expenses that fall under the 70%. And we just leave the unsecured debt, like credit card debt and personal lines of credit and things like that have been often spent in emergency situations because there wasn't enough cash flow, or maybe even in frivolous situations like trying to buy your way into fame or something like that.
So real quick, to make all of this real simple, here's a rule of thumb. If your policy loan is going to be outstanding for more than 5 years, you're just going to be paying the interest on it, then you need to reevaluate how much you're putting away, how much you're putting toward the creditors, and how much is outstanding on your policy loans. But up to 5 years, usually no problem as long as you're managing your cash flow properly.
And this follows a rule of Warren Buffett, who was taught early by his father that the best way to build equity or assets is to leverage other people's money. Because the interest that you pay to others is not as critical to your wealth building as the interest that is compounding and making your principal grow. Mm-hmm. And you need to understand how that works in order to not be in a disadvantageous state when you're borrowing from a policy to reduce unsecured debt.
Yes. So it's a balance. You have to make sure that is in place. Very, very good. So something else, from time to time here at Life Benefits, we correspond with a client or a prospect and who has talked to a financial planner. Financial planners are trained to balance people's risk in different investments by investing in a mixture of several different things. So, for example, they might have index funds and they might have bonds, and they might put all of this into a portfolio and say that they have balanced the risk or diversified the portfolio.
And they call that your risk tolerance. So they evaluate you to see what your risk tolerance is before they would try to balance your portfolio. Ironically, if you have been sporadically employed at multiple different jobs, if you're an entrepreneur, if you haven't ever really held a steady occupation or developed a steady business and been very successful, your risk tolerance is very, very high according to the standard traditional financial planner's model. Does that mean anything? No, it just means that they assume because you've bounced around all over the place like this and never really settled down and made any money, that that you can tolerate risk, that it doesn't bother you. However, the better way to evaluate that is how much money are you willing to lose? What is your loss tolerance? Not your risk tolerance. And when we look at someone's loss tolerance, which we do here at Life Benefits, and that's why we say only what's affordable and comfortable, then we come up with a completely different idea and plan that is going to be much more secure than something that is based off your risk tolerance.
Yes. You mentioned Nassim Taleb earlier.
Yes.
The author of the Black Swan book came out in 2007. He was talking about some of the different some of the risk that goes on in the market. People and financial planners included think that they're balancing for this risk by rebalancing portfolios and having all these different strategies to diversify everything properly, even as the market changes.
I know what you're going to say next, John, and this is so important that you need to really pick up a piece of paper or pencil or hit record and take this message home with you.
As long as the averages continue, their models work okay. But the problem is they don't. In the last 50 years, this was in 2007 that he's writing this, he says, in the last 50 years, the 10 most extreme days in financial markets represent half the returns.
10 days representing half the returns.
In the last 50 years.
There's no way you can average that out.
Right. It is huge. And so when you're talking about risk, there's really two different types of risk. There's risk that's exposed in the financial markets,
yes.
Risks like that you do not know the magnitude of it. And one huge cycle of that, volatility, up or down, could mean massive differences in a lifetime.
Yes. And that could be massive profits or massive losses
massive.
depending on which side
You're
of the
exposed
uptick
to.
or downtick you're on.
Exactly. And so whether you're concentrated in bonds or invested in index funds, however that's diversified, there is conceivably a large negative event that could affect both of those.
Yes.
They're both exposed to the market. So the other type of risk is based on things that we know do not change significantly over time. For example, the risk of of how long somebody is going to live, life expectancy. Even if somebody lives for 120 years, it's not going to change the average life expectancy of the United States that much because there's so many other people. That average is not going to change significantly. Whereas if we look at somebody's wealth, for example, which is similar to a financial market, Jeff Bezos, for example, if all of his wealth, you take just that one person and divide up his wealth, but he does significantly affect the average net worth of Americans.
He does, but even then, John, if you divide all of Jeff Bezos' net worth up and give everybody their fair share of that, it's about $447 a piece.
Yeah.
It's not going to make any of us wealthy, but at the same time, what Jeff Bezos is doing is making all of our lives wealthier because it's keeping prices at a competitive rate.
Yes.
And not that Jeff Bezos doesn't need some competition.
Yeah.
Because monopolies are created this way, and if people don't continue to try to compete with him, then he could raise prices clear out of the sky after a while because he's killed off all of his competition.
That's right. So let's talk about risk. Here's with another story that also comes from the Black Swan book. This illustrates the type of risk in financial markets very well. The story of the Mirage hotel
Right here
in Las Vegas,
yes.
founded by Steve Wynn in 1989. There were, gambling. People see that as a way of risk management. But over time, the results from the gambling they don't change or vary that much. That risk can be planned for. It's known. The outcomes are known in advance and the probability of those outcomes.
And what you're saying is that the casino never loses.
Exactly. And they have, unless somebody cheats. And so they have lots of systems in place, cameras, surveillance, people walking the floor to make sure that the cheating doesn't happen because that would throw their models off. So if something big happened to put the casino out of business, you might expect that it would be in the gambling area. That doesn't happen very often. The casino always wins. But there were 4 things early on in the history of the Mirage Casino that did nearly put them out of business. None of them were on their projected risk models.
In fact, they couldn't be even.
You couldn't plan for these
You
things.
couldn't plan for it. Yeah.
For example, the show Siegfried and Roy was the tiger attacked one of them. I can't remember which one it was now, and that show was ended. They lost an estimated $100 million in ticket revenues. Mm-hmm. That was one. I mean, nearly put him out of business. Another risk then, Steve Wynn's daughter was kidnapped, and he had to pay a ransom of $1.4 million. He got some of that money from the cash cage at the Mirage Casino, which exposed him to another risk, not only for dipping into the business funds personally, but for the risk of maintaining the casino operations. Mm-hmm. Another risk that they were exposed to is an employee did not file the IRS forms that were required when people made winnings at the casino. Every time you win over a certain amount, the casino is supposed to file a form with the IRS. Well, the employee made those forms, but then they stuck them all in a box under their desk and never sent them into the IRS. That could have been a big problem when it was discovered a number of years later. And finally, there was a disgruntled contractor that tried to plant dynamite around the pillars supporting the Mirage Hotel and Casino. That could have been obviously disastrous. They caught it just in time. How do you plan for these risks?
You don't. And that's why it's so important that we allow the insurance company to float that risk for us and give us a guaranteed contract, regardless if another 9/11 happens, if another Katrina happens, if there is an unexpected high risk of mortality, or the market crashes again. The insurance company has provided a contract that gives you guaranteed returns based on their statistical analysis of large numbers over long periods of time.
And it's the type of data that doesn't change dramatically based on life expectancy.
That's correct. And not only do they have that data behind them, but they have large numbers behind them. They're managing billions of dollars. For when we try to float the market like they do, we might do good to have a couple of million. And it just is much easier to float the market with a much larger portfolio, which none of us have the ability to do. You know, a lot of traditional planners will tell you that the way to avoid the risk of volatility is through diversification. And I always like to go back to what Warren Buffett says about diversification. He says that it's for people who don't know what they're doing. And so, yes, it might mitigate some of the risk that you're exposing yourself to by diversification. But our world is so interconnected today that it only takes one bubble to pop, like the real estate bubble in 2008, to make the entire financial world crumble. And we've got several of those bubbles being overinflated right now. One of them is the student loan debt, which is now over $1.6 trillion. And the other one is even more volatile than that, and that is commercial lending rate, which is about 9 times bigger than that. And the reason it's more volatile is that every 3 months, that debt has to be renewed. And the contracts can be changed, the interest rates can be risen, increased. Yeah. And so that can be a huge thing. Now, where does all that debt sold to? That debt is sold to investors that assume the risk that those people are going to pay their debt back.
Yeah, so a lot of people investing in index funds or through their 401ks are exposed to this risk.
Yes, and even IRAs and even in mutual funds.
Sure.
All that is mixed up and commingled so that supposedly that diversification is going to save you, and yet it didn't save very many people in 2008 or in the 1980 real estate bubble or in the 2000 dot-com bubble. It's just for people who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that you should never invest? We're not advocating that at all, because investment is a great way to increase your equity. But to do it with other people's money, like Warren Buffett's father taught him at an early age, and that gets into the whole principle of the perpetual wealth code that we talk about and advocate and teach, is by building guaranteed solid growth in an asset like participating in life insurance gives you signature loan availability. You don't have to go through the process of all the documentation of getting a traditional loan. You have access to it with a signature to take care of opportunities that come your way on a day-to-day basis.
That's right. And it's a totally different risk in the life insurance than it is when you're in the financial market. So the takeaway from this is to get your guarantees as guaranteed as possible. We use the life insurance and love that as a wonderful tool to get those guarantees, an asset. And then if you find those other investments to go take, you know that you're taking that risk. You can safely balance that risk with the guaranteed foundation that you have with your life insurance.
That's so true. And so many people are worried about when those investments will happen, when those opportunities. You don't have to really worry about it, because nature, by its very course, hates a vacuum. And so as you build equity in life insurance and have liquidity, that you have access to other people's money that is not going to penalize you and keep you from earning the guaranteed returns on your own money, opportunities are going to knock. And then it's just a matter of you deciding, is this risk something that I can afford, and am I comfortable with it? Mm-hmm. It's always back down to those two worlds, what's affordable and what's comfortable. And most of that comes from the ability to keep more of the money that you're making right now and your knowledge bases. And so typically the best investments to make are the ones that you know the most about.
There we go. So that's the takeaway for you today. There is a way that you do not have to be exposed to all the risks that traditional financial planners and the gurus out there tell you that you have to take on today in some form or the other. So give us a call if we can help you get the guarantees in your life through the life insurance. Call us at 702-660-7000. Until next week, we'll be back. You are listening to Wealth Talks, where we talk about solutions, money, and other things that create wealth in your life.